This video is going to show you how you can get out of that feeling stuck phase in your baseball performance. I'm going to show you the exact framework that the athletes in my Purely Performance training program have used to go from the high to lower 80s into the more mid and upper 80s in terms of velocity. I'm Logan Anderson, Purely Performance on Instagram, and I coach pitchers who either don't know how to train properly or feel like they're training hard but just aren't seeing the results. If that's you, then you're in the right place. The first step of this process is to identify what you're missing. And I look to these three places to kind of assess that. So weight room, nutrition, workload, and then we usually just start off with the nutrition because this is like the most lacking spot for most high school and even a lot of college athletes as well. So making sure you have the body to be at high performance, peak performance is a huge key thing here. So first, we got to look at your goals. We got to look at where you're at right now and where you need to be at peak performance. So a lot of high school guys are underweight. They need to gain muscle. They need to gain overall mass, maybe even a little body fat to protect their arm and their body and prevent injury. And then some guys maybe are a little overweight. They need to lose a little bit of mass so that they can move more efficiently on the field. And then some guys just need to maintain their mass, right? And that could be losing fat while putting on muscle and just trying to stay at the same weight. So that's kind of the first step there. We got to look, calculate out all your calories, your protein, carb, everything, and just see like where you need to be and what we need to implement to get you there. And that leads us into the habits. So do you track calories? Do you track protein? I usually have athletes like just track it for a week, see where you're at with calories and protein. Like don't be intentional about it. Don't be really paying attention to the numbers. Just track the food that you eat and see what the numbers are looking like. And then that helps us identify the holes. So maybe you're not eating enough at breakfast and you're an undersized athlete. That's an area where we can attack, implement a plan, and help us better achieve the goals. Maybe you're not eating enough protein. So these are very key things that we can attack by identifying the holes. And then type of food is like another way to attack those holes, right? So more particularly with like the macros, if you're not hitting your protein goal, then we really need to look at what types of foods you are eating and what could we replace to maybe help us hit that protein goal, carb goal, and whatnot. Now we're going to go over the weight room here. So a lot of players kind of just piece together bits of information that they see on TikTok, on Instagram, random exercises, throwing them together and creating a plan. That's something I did when I was younger, or maybe guys don't even know what they're doing. They're just doing some bodybuilder lifts. And that's going to work to some extent, build up the base, but like that's not going to translate to on the field performance. So we need to look at strength, speed, mobility, make sure we're checking all the boxes. As pitchers, we get into deep positions, and the mobility is going to help us get into deeper positions. The speed is going to help us get out of those positions really quick, and then the strength will help us put force behind our body as we're getting out of those positions. So when it comes to strength, the first thing that we're looking at is compound lifts. This comes down to bench, squat, deadlift, and there's plenty more. These numbers are very important. We want to get these strengths up, but they're only going to move the needle to a certain extent. We also need to attack the body from different angles with unilateral and isometric work. In terms of speed, sprints are a great way to teach your body how to move quickly, as well as plyometric work. So this could be a box jump, any sort of jumping hurdle jump. You can do upper body plyometrics with like a push-up clap. You can use med balls, throwing them as fast as you can. And then we have velocity work, which kind of relates to the compound lifts more so. And that's moving quick. So maybe not trying to rack up the weight and gain a bunch of strength on like a squat, but rather doing like a box squat with a little bit less weight and sitting down on the box and then exploding out of that position as quickly as you can. And then mobility, stretching out the hips, The legs, making sure the body's primed to get into some deep positions. That's going to help in the weight room and on the mound. Upper body mobility is huge. You don't want anything tight in here. You don't want any tight pec, tight shoulder, tight arm. It can cause injury and also just limits what positions that you can get into. And mobility just builds overall athleticism as well. So if you can get into these deep positions and then train your body to like get out of those positions as well, that's just going to help your overall athleticism as an athlete in the weight room and on the field. So now we're going to talk about workload here. This is a huge one, and this is a hard concept to understand. It takes a lot of trial and error, and usually working with a more experienced trainer or coach is going to be your best bet for getting an understanding of workload. So we have stimulus and recovery, and the balance between these two is kind of the key to peak performance as an athlete. So you want to stimulate the body, you want to build adaptation in the weight room with all three of the silos that we just talked about, but you need to make sure that they're spaced out properly, that you have time to recover, so we're not getting any injuries and we can maximize what we're getting out of our training. This is going to totally depend on the time of year, mostly because as pitchers, our throwing is really dependent on the time of the year. So if you're in a more off-season phase, you're not throwing as much high-intensity days, this is a time when we can kind of turn it up in the weight room. But as we get closer to the season and we're playing games, kind of ramping up more bullpens, throwing needs to be the priority, but we can still get good work in the weight room as long as it's spaced out around those high throwing days. Even in the off season, it's important to space out speed and strength work. During your lifting, you can combine them together, but if you're doing 5 sprint sessions a week, your body's going to be depleted and you're not going to get much out of those sprint sessions because you're just going to be so taxed. When we're looking at recovery, we have arm care, off days, scheduling. So arm care is kind of similar to weightlifting, where guys kind of piece things together from stuff they see from teammates or online. And that's just not the right approach because every person is a little bit different and has their own needs, right? So if you're just doing 10 different arm care exercises, you're just adding more stress onto your arm. So you need a plan that's kind of developed for what you're feeling on that day or in that moment. You need to restore range of motion and you need to be promoting blood flow to the area. Off days, I have this in parentheses because there really shouldn't be many off days. Yes, every once in a while it's okay to take a complete off day and give your brain a rest, but even then, off days should consist of active recovery. That's what I call it, at least. I like to get a little bit of movement, like we talked about with the arm care, promoting some blood flow. Maybe it only takes 10, 15 minutes, but at least you put a little bit of effort in to be ready later on in the week, later on in the day. Then one of the hardest parts of this whole roadmap is the scheduling. Figuring out how to fit everything into your week in a way that's going to allow you to put the most effort into each training session while maximizing your outputs from those training sessions. If you're doing too much and you don't have time to recover, then you won't get the most out of your training sessions and you might even get injured. But if you're doing too little, then you're not creating enough adaptation for the body, and then you're just going to stay in the same place you've always been at. Learning how to balance this is a fine line, and it takes experience, which you don't typically have as a young athlete. That's why working with someone that has been through the process or trained athletes through this process can be so valuable. So now you have the framework, but it's up to you to apply it. You can go assess where you're at and what you're doing and form an attack plan to improve performance. But if you're serious about taking your game to the next level and you'd like a little bit more guidance, I walk athletes through this whole process from start to finish. I give them the exact tools that they need to gain velocity and improve performance on the mound. Everything we talked about today in constant communication on adjustments for your needs. If this is something that you might be interested in, Let's set up a meeting. You can message me on Instagram at Purely Performance, or click the link in my bio for the Calendly, and we can set up a free evaluation meeting. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you gained some knowledge from it.